Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to have a little catch up with the industry that was set to gain the biggest benefits from Brexit, fishing. Quite timely, as there have been a couple of significant stories of wins for the British industry this week. A trawler having to be taken out of action due to Brexit quotas, and a seafood factory closing down as well. Both of them result, of course, in job losses amongst leave voting turkeys, as well as further afield. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So let's check back with the Brexit poster boys, the fishing industry. How are they getting on with all the winning that leaving the EU has brought them? Not too well, it seems. I'm actually going to start off with the seafood factory because it's located in Grimsby. There are some major points of personal interest for me here because I lived in Grimsby for a little over 10 years. In theory, it was no great surprise to me to see that the town voted for Brexit in 2016, but it was utterly maddening. It's a fishing town. That's it, really. Yes, like all other towns, of course, there are other things going on, but the fishing industry feeds that town. Like a lot of other similar places, the Brexiteers lied to them, telling them that being in the EU restricted their potential for fishing. It was absolute nonsense, of course. First of all, the UK never had fishermen just kicking their heels as foreign fishermen were out catching their catch. You know, half of the crews of British fishing vessels were foreign. Half of them. Because we didn't even have enough domestic fishermen to meet our own quotas. So what on earth were we going to do with more quotas when we didn't have the people to even make out existing ones without having to employ one foreign fisherman for every British one? But that wasn't even the dumbest part of it. Trade's a two-way process. In theory, we could leave the EU and deny fishing rights to foreign vessels. Okay, fine. So we catch all the fish. I mean, we don't because we don't have the fishermen to do it. But let's say we do. What then? In order to be of any value to the industry, we need to be able to sell it. Now, we only buy a relatively small amount of British fish in the UK, mostly because we prefer fish from other waters. So we sell the vast majority of the catch from British waters abroad. So we needed to sell this catch to the very countries we were intending to screw over by denying quotas. How is that ever going to happen? So the fishing industry, you know, Brexit was the idea that you would be allowed to catch more fish when British fishermen couldn't even catch enough on their own to meet their own quotas at the time, but not be able to sell it. Because if we restrict access to our waters, other countries restrict access to their ports and therefore markets. The fishing industry were used. They were used by Farage and his goons. They were used by Johnson and his Tories. Used to be the poster boys of Brexit, and now look. Remainers were right again. Quelle surprise. Still, I have to say I've got less sympathy for any fishermen who voted for Brexit. I accept that not all of them would have done. And then, of course, Tory. Yes, they were lied to, but it's one thing for a member of the public to be lied to about something they know nothing about. Most members of the public know nothing about trade, nothing about the EU, nothing about anything to do with Brexit. But it's another thing to be lied to specifically about how your own industry works. How can fishermen not have actually understood how fishing works? They haven't exactly covered themselves in glory here. A seafood factory is closing in Grimsby, citing COVID, the war in Ukraine and Brexit as factors in the decision. Aha! Cry out the Brexiteers. COVID in Ukraine. Don't you try sneaking Brexit into it. It's global factors. Global factors. Yeah. The owners of the factory say they're closing it down to concentrate their efforts in Europe. Oh. You know, where they've got COVID and the war in Ukraine. In fact, COVID and the war of Ukraine hit them harder. I mean, I know we suffered more, but that's because of our response. But they were hit harder. But they didn't raise massive trade barriers with their main export markets. Oh, yeah. And this particular factory will mean the loss of 200 jobs, I gather. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But 200 jobs means 200 households, really. You know, some of them will be the only wage earners in their home, but it doesn't matter if they're not. You know, the cost of living now means that many people cannot cope right now. Now, you imagine just, even if there's two wage earners in that household, one of them ending. And I have to tell you, Grimsby is not exactly an investment magnet. None of this, they'll just get a job somewhere else. You know, especially since Brexit. It was one thing to vote for Brexit, but in 2019, I did say, if they follow expectations and vote Tory in the general election, I'm going to have to suggest they take the mantle of England's dumbest town from Hartlepool. Yes, Hartlepool hung a monkey thinking it was a French spy, but that was a long time ago, and it was not a decision that plunged their own economy into ruin. It was a decision that really only hurt the monkey. There are other towns that voted for both Brexit and the Tories, of course, including Hartlepool, and they're all now suffering from those decisions. But Grimsby surely was one of the most dependent towns on not only access to the single market, but full membership of the EU. Only by having a seat at the table did Grimsby get anything. 200 jobs, 200 households. And it's not even just 200 households. It's the businesses in the local area who will now get less business now that those 200 households have got less money to spend. Things like this create a downward spiral. We saw it in the 80s. But at least the communities hit by Thatcher in the 80s generally voted against it, so they had a bit of dignity. This time the turkeys actually voted for Christmas. And there was nothing particular about this seafood factory. It's not at the eye of some perfect storm with other businesses basically fine. It's closing ultimately because it cannot easily trade from Britain. The same pressures will be brought to bear on more businesses to come in Grimsby and elsewhere. Thanks to the Tories' Brexit budget, people in Britain will find that they've got less money to spend in real terms. That's without even losing their jobs. So businesses based in Britain will be selling less to British customers because British customers are going to have much less disposable income now because of this budget. And the trade barriers remain to potential EU customers. Next year, they're actually set to get higher still. This will drive more businesses to close down here to concentrate in Europe. Then there's the Fenella, the trawler, which is having to cease operations due to a lack of available quota. Because the thing about the quotas agreed when we left the EU was that it wasn't just between the EU and the UK. I mean, that would have been messy enough. There are countries outside the EU whose waters we like to fish in, or we used to. It was actually a big job to sort it all out. But Boris Johnson and David Frost were magnificently very lazy grifters. The quota settlement after Brexit could have been an exact mirror of what it was before, in theory. Fishermen might have been upset that they didn't get their Brexit benefits, but it would be mostly life as normal. Mostly because there's still fish which you cannot lawfully import into the EU from a third country. So those would still be knackered. But by and large, it could have been roughly the same. But no. The quotas are, for many, worse. I mean, we have fishing vessels which are now either catching less or nothing at all, as is about to be the case with the Fenella, because our post-Brexit fishing deal was worse than our pre-Brexit one. And you notice that Nigel Farage, who set himself up as the champion of the fishing industry, barely says a word about them now. Has even mentioned these two news stories this week. Haven't seen him say anything. Like I say, he used to be he used the fishermen for his own purposes. Used to be all over them. Now he's done with them. He's tossed them away, working on his latest grifts. Where's his champion of the fishing industry now? In the bin. Or maybe it's just on top of the shelf to be dusted off if he ever works out a way of making money from them again. But these things won't be massive national news either. It's not just Farage who can't be arsed with fishermen anymore. The industry is actually a really tiny part of the UK economy. Tiny. The idea that the government was going to screw over the rest of the economy just for fishermen was ridiculous. If they were going to screw over the rest of the economy, it was going to be to let their rich mates get even richer. And you know what? Their rich mates do not go out on the high seas catching fish. It's dangerous, it's cold, and it's otherwise unpleasant. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.